Okay, so this is where we got to in the last video. We've brought this look in from Clo. We brought the avatar in from Mixamo. It came originally from Daz, and now we've got this animation walking. There is a small issue in the hat that I'm going to show you guys how to fix. So we've got this shading issue going on right here. Like around the edges, the normals are incorrect. We can fix this kind of thing in Blender, but we really can also do this by changing how we export things from Clo. So for now, I'm just going to jump back to Clo and show you how this export works from Ogawa. So we exported an Alembic Ogawa of this look, and it's taken all of the pattern pieces and everything with it. If you look though now, I only have one material. Beforehand, I had multiple materials. Let's looking in our Clo file, we've got all these materials here. In some cases, I don't need them all. In some cases, I want to have them, and it's up to you what you need. Right now, they've all gone, and I can work around this, let's say. So I'm just going to make another export of this setup. And the first thing I'm going to do is just hide the visibility of the hat. So select the hat and turn this off, press Shift and Q to turn off all of these pieces here. So now the hat is not included in our export anymore. So I'm just going to go to File, Export, Ogawa, Walk Cycle Frame 0 to 60, and call this Garments, because my hat is coming separately. So now just click Save, and this is going to export just the look. Again, thin, weld, unified UV, FPS set to 30, the rest is fine. Meters is what we need for Blender, click OK. And then this is going to quickly export. What this means you can do is, in theory, you could export one Alembic cache for each single garment, so that when you bring them back into Blender, you then have multiple Alembic caches that you can apply different materials to, and then you can have control over your material slots in that way. I'm just going to do half that and half of a different way. So let's say now I want the hat to be visible, and I want the rest of the garments to be invisible. I'm going to turn those visibilities off, and then I'm just going to take a look at the hat in the thick mode. So when the hat is set to thick, I have more definition around all of these things, as opposed to when it's set to thin, I have less definition. This thickness we can add back in Blender. So don't worry about exporting all this as thin now, we can add all this back in Blender. The thing that we need to be concerned about is the normals around all the edges. So this time we're going to export just this hat, and just make sure all the other pieces are hidden so that they're not being exported. Just the hat is good. Go to File, Export, Alembic, Ogawa, Walk Cycle Frame 0 to 60, and then just call this one Hat, because then we can see that it is the hat. And then this time, instead of choosing Weld, choose Unweld. Unified UVs, everything else is the same, click OK, and that will just quickly export just the hat, and then we can import all this back into Blender, and I'll show you the difference. So for now, let's just turn off the visibility of this guy called Cloth Parent. Go to File, Import, Alembic, and choose, first we'll choose Garments. So now the garments are in the scene. We have no normal issues on this one, really. And then go to File, Import, Alembic, and then choose the one called Hat, and import that as well. And you see now that this is not welded. We've fixed this issue, is not existing because it's not joined all these pattern pieces together. If we look at this one, and I just move it to the side, there's all this shading issues because those pieces are welded together, and it's creating an issue where those normals are all coming together. So for now, I can put this guy back where he was, and I'm going to turn him off. Actually, I'm going to delete him altogether because I don't need him in the scene anymore. So now I have two Alembic. I can set one material to the hat and one material to the clothes, but we still have this clipping issue. The clipping issue is really easy to fix. First, I'll just address the thickness. So if I choose this hat, I go to the modifiers, and then I add a solidify modifier underneath my my mesh sequence with my animation. I'm going to now add thickness back in, but this is way, way too thick. So this thickness is set now to I think 10 centimeters, 0.01 meters. So set this to 0.02, and that will be 0.002, and that will be 2 millimeters. So if you look at this now with thickness applied and no thickness, you can see the difference. There is a bit of intersection here where the front side and the back side are coming through, and I think you can turn off the offset, and now there's no intersection anymore. So set the offset to 0, and then the rest we have now got thickness added back. You can do the same for the garments, add modifier, solidify, and turn this down to 0.001, for example. And now we have a little bit of thickness around the edges of our garment. If you want to add specific thicknesses for the solidify, you can do this by Vertex Group. So you could select your garment, go to edit mode. You could start selecting pattern pieces. So if you use L, this will select linked things. And if you set this to UV, you could select, for example, the pockets, go to the Vertex Groups, add a Vertex Group here, call it pockets, for example, and then go back to your solidify modifier, and then set this to just affect the pockets Vertex Group. So that's how we can use this to target specifically one area of the mesh, whereas now I just want it to affect the whole mesh. So I'm going to turn this Vertex Group off, and now this is ready to set the loop. Because if we look at this straight on, I'm just going to turn this overlay toggle off to see this without any of the overlays here. We get this clip from frame 60 back again, just there. This is actually quite easy to fix, but we just need to convert this cache. Because what we have now is if I choose this, I have a mesh sequence cache applied, and I can't really edit this. The same for the hat. We can add these solidify modifiers back to add the thickness again when we've fixed this whole loop. For now, I'm just going to delete them so that they don't get exported into my new cache that I'm going to make. To do this, we are going to select one object at a time and just convert this from an Alembic to an MDD. And to do that, we're going to go to File, Edit, Preferences, and then Add-ons. Under your add-ons, search for MDD, and then you've got Import Export New Tech MDD format. Make sure this is active, and then we can use this to change how we can work with this animation. So set this add-on active. Choose your garments, go File, Export, MDD, and then put this in your Blender exports and call this garments frame 0 to 60. And click Export MDD, and that will just run an export quickly of this as an MDD file. Depending how complex your mesh is, this might be quick or slow. Again, for the hat, get rid of that solidify modifier for now. We can add it back. Go to File, Export MDD, and then call this hat frame 0 to 60. Export MDD. Now, with the hat selected, delete the mesh sequence cache in the modifiers on the side. So do this for both, and we now no longer have garments animated because we deleted those cache files. We want to import the new ones we just exported, and the reason we do this is to make this much more editable. So go choose this garment, File, Import, MDD, choose your garments MDD cache and click Import. And it will take a second, and if it's worked, we will get some shape keys down here. Okay, so if you choose your garment and you look under your object data properties, under shape keys, I now have one shape key per frame of animation. And what this is doing now is it's turning on and off each frame with a keyframe here. So we brought the animation back, but now we can really edit this exactly how we want. Okay. So we do the same for the hat, go to File, Import, MDD, choose the hat, and click Import. If you look at my file sizes right here, they're about nothing's over 50 megabytes for this 60 frames. And that's because of my mesh is set to a mid particle distance, let's say. This isn't too high. And because in Clo, if I look back here, all of my top stitching in this outfit is set to texture. So my top stitches are being dealt with as textures and not objects. If you have this set to object, you're going to have a really, really big file size of your animation cache. So I would advise that you always deal with top stitching as textures and not as objects, and that will greatly reduce the file size that you're working with your Alembic exports and then your MDD imports as well. So now that this is set up, we can work with this in a much more effective way. And what I mean by that is if I go down here now and I change this from the graph editor, drop this menu down and go to nonlinear animation, I can look at my cloth parent. So I have two cloth parents. This is how it gets exported out of Clo, and I can now rename these. So let's rename this one garments, and let's rename this one hat, right? We can deal with these one at a time in our non-linear animation editor at this point, okay? So like I said, for the armature, frame 0, frame 30, and frame 60 are all the same frames. There is no difference in the way that this avatar is posed in these frames, so this will allow us to blend. Look under your garment. We'll do the garments first. Drop this little menu down where it says key, and then we have key action here. So now this is a series of keyframes, and I actually have one keyframe extra on either side. This happens when we import the MDD cache, so just select this keyframe at -1 and press X to delete it, and the one at the end, press X to delete it. This still runs, but we still have the clip there. So to fix that little clip from start to finish, push this action down. So under garments, you have this option here that says push down action, and it will turn this now into a strip. If you move this strip, your animation is going to work in a different, timing. But this is how we can now fix this clipping. So choose this frame, go to 30, like right in the middle of our animation cycle, and make sure that you set this under strip options on the side, that you turn this extrapolation from hold to nothing. Very important. Make sure this is set from hold to nothing. It's in the strip thing on the side. Choose here, extrapolation set to nothing. Press Shift and D with this track selected and duplicate it to the above track. And then with this set to 30, so right in the middle from 0 to 60 frames, right and click and choose split strips. So we'll now split this in half and allow us to blend from frame 0 to frame 30 and loop that back around. So choose both of these strips and press G and just drag this little notch that we see on the screen now over to right in the end here. I think I can move myself up here, so I'm out of the way of the NLA editor. So with these tracks here, I've now got NLA track and a key action track underneath it. What I've done now is I've moved this very midpoint right to the beginning so that I can start here, go into this track, and then end here. And I just need to blend this down now. And the way to blend from one track to another track is to use the animated influence option here. So choose this track here, go to animate influence, and at the end of this, we want this to be 0. We want to blend back out about halfway down this track. So turn this influence here to 0 as well, and press I to insert a keyframe. And then right at the beginning, you see this influence should be set to 1. Press I to insert a keyframe, and now we have this white line that is blending down the strip. And that is controlled by this keyframe here. So if I move this keyframe, I can blend further down the track or I can blend further up the track. And that will mean that we start here, blend into this strip, and then finish here. And this point here is the beginning of this point over here. So we kind of start where we ended. So if I set the end now to 30, and we're going from frame 1 to frame 30 and not 0 to 60, this should now loop just the garments. Let's ignore the hat for a second. And we shouldn't have any glitching as we go back to the beginning. So if I turn the overlays off, you see now we don't have any clip because we've blended these frames down. So we can do this same thing again now for the hat because the hat has a tiny bit of clip in it. So let's close up the garment one and look at the hat one. So again, look at this key under the hat in the NLA editor. Drop this down and then look at this strip that we've got here. So I'm going to select the hat, and I have one keyframe extra in the beginning, so I'm going to delete that, and one keyframe extra at the end, so I'm going to delete that. I'm going to choose this key action, and I'm going to push this down, push action down to turn this into a strip. And again, in extrapolation mode, I'm going to turn this to nothing. If you don't have this set to nothing, you can't play tracks on top of each other. So if you're struggling to blend from one to another, check this setting. Again, go to frame 30, split this track right in the middle so that we can blend around this point here. And then you can duplicate these tracks and just drag them right over to frame 0 so that our notch from the 30th frame is set now to our 0 frame. Again, select this track here that is now our blending track, turn on animated influence. At the end, we want this to be set to 0, so we insert a keyframe there. At frame 15, we want this to be set to 0, so I'm going to press I to insert a keyframe there. And our very first frame 0, should be set to 1. So let's insert a keyframe here. And again, if we want to change how intense this blending is, we can move this up and down to move this white blend line right here. But if we now run this animation from frame 1 to frame 30 so that we loop all those 30 frames around, everything should kind of cycle in a really nice and smooth way. So there's no glitch from start to finish. This is just kind of going on continuously. And this isn't going to end. The way that we can fix materials now that we've set this up as an MDD cache is to, for example, our hat can have its own material applied because it's a separate object entirely. For our garments, let's say we want to split this up in some way. So under materials now, I have 0 materials. If I go on from this into edit mode, and I just look quickly at selecting the shirt, let's say. So if I press L, I can either set this to UVs, which will select just the UV island, so it will select just the front shirt panel, or I could set this to seam, and that will select everything that's welded or connected to this seam. So that's now selected the entire shirt. I could add a new material, call this shirt, and then assign this material to the shirt. Then we would do the same for the t-shirt. So press L to select the t-shirt, add a new material, name it t-shirt. I'll change the color of this one just to identify it. And then assign that, click assign for this geometry. We then do the same for the pants. So let's just select the pants, add a new one, call this shirt. No, we're going to call this pants because it's the pants. We'll just add a random color here to see how it's working, and then click assign. So now if we look at this in object mode and just quickly jump into the shader preview, we should have assigned materials to all of this. So now we can break this back up into the materials that we had before just by selecting. What we want to look at as well is just adding back in that thickness. So again, go to your modifiers, choose your shirt, add modifier, solidify, set the offset to 0 and the thickness to 0.002 to add 2 millimeters of thickness to these garments. And then we can do the same for the hat. So add a modifier, solidify, set this to 0, set this thickness to 0.002, and we can just add a bit of thickness to this hat as well. This is all now running. I think we've added the solidify. If you've got some pointy geometry issues, let's say, what we can do is add some subdivision. So if I look at this in wireframe mode, my particle distance is quite average, let's say, but I might want to add to smooth this off a bit. So let's say I select the shirt, well, the whole garment section. I'm going to add a modifier and I'm going to add subdivision surface. This might take a second to add. And I'm just going to drag this above my solidify modifier. So it subdivides and then it solidifies everything. And if I turn off optimal display on this, you can see now how much more smoothed out this mesh is. This is before subdivision, this is after subdivision, and before. So if you just look at the before and after, you can see a little bit of the smoothing on the edges of the mesh. This is a lot easier to do when you have a quad mesh like this than it is if you have a triangulated mesh like we had in the beginning. So again, we could do this to the hat as well, add modifier, subdivision. I'll move this above the solidify and turn off optimal display. So we've got a bit better texture resolution here. And again, this will kind of soften off some of those sharper edges that we've got. So working in this way really allows you to have a lot more control over the animation, over the mesh that you're working with, and it allows you to improve the quality and work with this a lot outside of Clo. So that's how to get from Daz to Mixamo to Clo to Blender and back again. How to make your animation loop continuously, and how to attach things to your avatar, shoes, accessories, eyelashes, whatever you need. You should understand how to work with the rig that you set up from Mixamo now. So I hope that's helpful, and I'm interested to see what you guys can come up with using this workflow.